The flight was supposed to be ordinary, one of those quiet, uneventful journeys where passengers settle into their seats, adjust their seatbelts, and prepare for a few hours of harmless boredom in sky. The soft hum of the engines, the gentle whisper of the air conditioning, and the occasional chatter of passengers created a calm, predictable rhythm. But that illusion of safety shattered without warning. The cabin lights flickered once, just enough for people to glance up, then flickered again, longer, as if struggling to stay alive. A sudden violent jolt threw cups, phones, and nerves into the air, and in an instant panic rippled down the aisles like a shockwave. Gasps, startled cries, and the thudding of hearts filled the narrow metal tube miles above the earth. For a moment everyone simply held their breath, waiting, hoping the turbulence was just a passing disturbance. But then the shaking intensified, and the aircraft lurched with a force that sent flight attendants grabbing for support. The intercom crackled with static, a harsh reminder that something was truly wrong. Seconds later, a trembling announcement came, not from a confident captain, but from a frightened member of the crew trying desperately to sound composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is anyone on board with flying experience, please come forward immediately." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Silence swallowed the cabin. Not the normal polite silence of passengers minding their own business. This was a heavy, suffocating quiet, filled with fear, disbelief, and the helpless realization that no one on this plane felt qualified to save it. People exchanged desperate glances, silently begging for a hero to stand up, for someone to declare they knew what to do. But no hands rose, no voices spoke. Heads turned left and right, searching, pleading, but finding nothing except widening eyes and trembling hands gripping armrests. It felt as if the plane itself was holding its breath, sinking deeper into uncertainty with every passing second. Then, from seat 14A, almost hidden between two passengers too afraid to look anywhere except straight ahead, a hand slowly lifted into the air. It wasn't raised with the confidence of a seasoned pilot or the pride of someone eager to be a hero. It was hesitant, trembling slightly, as if unsure whether it even belonged up there. A young woman sat in that seat, quiet, unassuming, the kind of person easily overlooked in a crowd. She didn't look like a pilot. She didn't carry the aura of a professional aviator or the swagger of someone used to taking command. She looked like any ordinary traveler who had booked a ticket, boarded a plane, and expected nothing more than to land safely at her destination. But she carried something no one else on that aircraft had, an invisible inheritance of knowledge, discipline, and instinct gifted to her by someone who was no longer alive. Her late father, a former Air Force instructor, had spent countless evenings guiding her through flight simulators, teaching her the principles of flight, emergency procedures, cockpit discipline. And most importantly, the mindset of a pilot. He had taught her to trust her instruments, stay calm under pressure, and understand the language of an aircraft. Those lessons had once felt like cherished memories, a way to stay connected to the man who had shaped her childhood. She had never expected they would become the difference between life and death. As she stood up, the cabin seemed to shift around her, not physically but emotionally. Passengers stared, hope flickering in their eyes for the first time since the chaos had begun. She could feel their fear pressing against her like a weight, but beneath her own trembling nerves was a quiet flame of determination. She didn't know whether she could save them, but she knew she had to try. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, calm, steady, full of trust, reminding her of all those nights when he sat beside her, guiding her hands on the controls, explaining every instrument with patience and pride. He had believed she had a natural instinct for flight, even when she had doubted herself. And now, destiny unexpected, undesired, but unavoidable, was calling her forward. The narrow aisle felt impossibly long as she walked toward the cockpit, every step accompanied by the groans of the wounded aircraft and the soft prayers of those still seated. She could feel the vibrations beneath her feet, each tremble reminding her how close they all were to disaster. But she kept moving. With each step, her father's teachings settled deeper into her mind, sharpening her focus and steadying her pulse. By the time she reached the cockpit door, she wasn't the frightened passenger from seat 14A anymore. She was the student of an Air Force instructor, a young woman shaped by hours of simulated storms, virtual emergencies, and a father who believed she was capable of more than she ever realized. The crew met her with desperate eyes, stepping aside as if they were handing her the fate of everyone on board. She hesitated for a heartbeat, just long enough to take a deep breath, to remember her father's calm voice saying, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what you must, even when you're terrified." And with that, she stepped into the cockpit, a place she had only ever seen on screens and simulators. Now thrown into chaos, alarms flashing, instruments screaming, and storm clouds wrapping the windows in darkness, she didn't know if she would succeed, but she knew she was no longer running from destiny. She was walking straight into it. The cockpit was a scene of pure disaster, alarms screaming, warning lights flashing in frantic patterns, the autopilot disconnecting with a harsh, metallic chime that felt like a final betrayal. Altitude was dropping fast, numbers on the screen spinning downward as if pulled by the hand of gravity itself. Rain hammered violently against the cockpit windows, each impact like the pounding of fists demanding entry, while lightning cracked across the sky with blinding white fury, splitting the darkness. Like shattered glass, clouds churned and twisted outside, forming monstrous walls of turbulence that tossed the aircraft like a toy in the hands of the storm. She slid into the captain's seat, her heart racing so violently it felt like it might burst through her chest. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the controls, not out of weakness, but out of the paralyzing weight of the moment. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't trained for this. She was a passenger who had stepped into a battlefield few professionals ever faced. But the moment her hands touched the yoke, something shifted. A memory rose through the chaos like a lighthouse cutting through fog, her father's voice steady, patient, and unshakably calm, speaking the words he had drilled into her during every simulator session they had ever shared: aviate, navigate, communicate, trust the aircraft, and yourself. The words wrapped around her like an anchor, pulling her back from the edge of panic. She inhaled deeply, letting the oxygen fill her lungs, forcing her mind into clarity. The storm roared outside, but inside her mind, a stillness began to form. She tightened her grip and gently, carefully, tilted the nose of the aircraft upward, fighting the violent wind shear that kept dragging the plane down. The controls resisted, shaking violently in her hands as though the aircraft itself was terrified. Warning tones blared in sharp intervals, altitude alerts, stall warnings, proximity alarms, all screaming for attention. But she focused on the fundamentals, just as her father had taught her. Aviate, fly the plane first. Keep it level, keep it alive. Inch by inch she fought the dive, pushing against forces far stronger than her own strength. The altimeter slowed, then slowed more. The descent rate decreased, a tiny victory, but a crucial one. She felt the aircraft responding to her, trusting her, depending on her. She swallowed the lump in her throat and kept going. The crew behind her watched in shock, their eyes wide as they witnessed something that felt impossible. A young woman, just minutes ago, a stranger in seat 14A, was now wrestling a failing commercial jet out of the sky with a focus and determination that none of them had expected. Rain streaked down the windshield, blurring the world outside into ghostly smears of gray. Turbulence threw the aircraft sideways, hard enough that one of the overhead compartments burst open behind her, sending papers and equipment scattering, but she didn't flinch. Her father's voice echoed again, as clear as if he were standing beside her. "The plane wants to fly. Help it do that. Don't fight what you don't need to fight." She adjusted her grip, easing the pressure just enough to stabilize the wings. The aircraft trembled, shuddered, then slowly began to level out. Alarms stopped one by one until only the storm remained. She glanced at the primary flight display, calculating heading, altitude, and bank angle with the same instinct she had once used in the safety of a simulator, only now the stakes were brutally real. She pressed her lips together, steadying her breathing. Her pulse was still racing, but her hands grew more certain, her motions more precise. Every button she pressed, every knob she turned, came not from panic, but from muscle memory shaped by hours spent beside her father's patient instruction. He had always told her that a cockpit was a place where fear had no room to grow, that a pilot didn't have the luxury of emotion in a crisis. She felt that truth now more than ever. Lightning flashed again, lighting up the cockpit in a burst of white that cast her determined face into stark relief. Thunder rumbled through the aircraft's frame, deep enough to be felt in the bones. The storm was far from done with them. Wind slammed into the fuselage, jolting the plane downward before she caught it again, pulling back just in time to keep them from plunging too far. She gritted her teeth, feeling the strain in her arms. The ache of muscles fighting against forces nature wasn't meant to unleash on a human being. But she refused to let go. The aircraft began to climb, slowly, painfully, but it climbed. Altitude ticked upward, one agonizing foot at a time. She exhaled shakily, allowing herself the smallest fraction of relief. Then she scanned the instruments again, checking for structural warnings, electrical failures, hydraulic issues. Everything was unstable but survivable if she could keep control. The storm outside howled, shaking the aircraft violently. The cabin lights flickered behind her. A distant sob rose from somewhere in the cabin, followed by whispered prayers. Yet here, in the heart of the storm, she had no time for fear, only action. The crew exchanged stunned glances. They had seen passengers panic, passengers faint, passengers scream. But never had they seen someone walk into the cockpit, sit in the captain's seat, and take command with such raw determination. She wasn't a pilot, not officially, but she was flying the aircraft. She was keeping hundreds of people alive. And they knew it. The co-pilot, unconscious from the earlier turbulence, lay strapped into his seat. The captain, still not fully responsive, moaned faintly. The responsibility fell solely on her shoulders. Scariest of all, she accepted it. She reached for the throttle, adjusting engine power to stabilize the climb. Her father's voice guided every motion. Smooth hands, smooth corrections. The plane listens better when you speak gently. She followed the advice, treating the aircraft like a living thing that needed reassurance rather than force. And it worked. The trembling diminished, the climb steadied. The storm continued to rage, but she was learning to read it, learning when to push against it and when to let it pass around them. She checked their heading, realizing the plane had drifted far off course. She corrected it, aligning them toward clearer air, calculating escape routes through the storm cells by interpreting the radar display, something she had only practiced digitally, but now trusted instinctively. Her eyes flicked between instruments, her mind running faster than her fear could catch up. The radios crackled faintly, but communication would come later. First survive, first fly the plane. The storm roared again, lightning striking so close that the cockpit lit up like a camera flash, casting sharp shadows on the walls. She blinked, shook off the shock, and held the controls steady. The aircraft shook, then steadied, then yielded to her command once more. A passenger, someone who came on board expecting nothing more than snacks, movies, and an on-time landing, was now the only thing keeping the jet in the sky. A passenger had become a pilot. A passenger had taken command of a falling aircraft, and for the first time since the nightmare began, survival felt possible. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, when every muscle in her body burned from holding the aircraft steady, and every alarm felt like a countdown to disaster, the radar suddenly lit up with new signals. At first, she thought it was another system glitch, another cruel reminder of how broken everything around her was. But the contacts weren't random, they were fast, sharp, precise. Two objects moving at incredible speed, closing the distance at a rate no commercial aircraft could ever match. Her breath caught. On the radar, they appeared like twin meteors streaking toward her position. The crew behind her tensed, exchanging confused looks as the blips grew brighter, closer, unmistakably intentional. For a heartbeat, fear surged through her again. What now? What else could possibly go wrong? But then the storm ahead cracked open, just a narrow tear in the swirling blackness, revealing two faint, angular silhouettes slicing through the violent clouds with impossible grace. The moment she saw them, her world shifted. The sharp delta wings, the sleek predatory lines, the unmistakable shape that even civilians recognized. F-22 Raptor fighter jets. They shot through the storm like ghosts of steel, engines roaring loud enough to vibrate through the fuselage. They weren't just flying, they were carving through the chaos, completely unfazed by the violent winds that had nearly sent her aircraft to its doom. The Raptors slowed just enough to match the airliner's wounded speed, then moved into perfect formation. One on each side, wings level, their guiding lights blinking in controlled rhythm through sheets of rain. It was like watching two guardian spirits materialize from the storm itself. The airliner shook violently as turbulence slammed into it again. But the F-22s held their positions with impossible steadiness, moving like they were attached to invisible rails. She felt a tremor of disbelief rush through her, fighter jets escorting her, a lone passenger who had stepped into the cockpit only minutes ago. The two Raptors tilted slightly, signaling acknowledgement, reassurance, and silent strength. Their presence was more than visual, it was emotional, overwhelming, like watching hope take a physical form. Then, through the static-filled radio, a deep, authoritative voice suddenly crackled to life. "Airliner, this is Eagle Lead. Hold her steady, we're with you." 4 simple words, yet they hit her harder than any jolt of turbulence. We're with you. She had been fighting the storm alone, holding the aircraft together with determination, stitched together from fear, instinct, and memories of her father's training. But now she wasn't fighting alone. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt her shoulders loosen, if only slightly. Her lungs drew in air that didn't taste entirely like panic. She swallowed hard, staring at the sleek silver silhouette to her left. Its canopy glowed faintly, and she knew that inside was a pilot calm, trained, focused, someone who had flown into a storm that even her massive airliner struggled to survive just to help her. On the right, the second Raptor held perfect formation, its wings unwavering even as lightning flashed dangerously close. Their confidence radiated through the storm, cutting through her fear like sunlight-piercing fog. She steadied the aircraft, adjusting the yoke with more certainty than before. She felt different now, stronger, supported, anchored. The Raptors seemed to sense her regained control. They dipped their wings in acknowledgement, then moved in slightly closer, guiding her through the storm with expert precision. Rain exploded against their frames, lightning illuminated their sharp edges, but nothing broke their formation. They were guardians of the sky, towering symbols of precision and power, but at this moment they were something even more important, protectors. The voice on the radio returned, calmer now, almost reassuring. "You're doing great. We've got your tail. Follow our lead." She blinked back, tears not of fear, but of relief, of gratitude, of sheer emotional exhaustion. She didn't dare take her eyes off the instruments, but she felt their presence flanking her like a shield. The storm still raged, but it felt less monstrous now, less unbeatable. She wasn't just an inexperienced woman fighting a terrifying sky. She was part of a formation, part of a team. The Raptors guided her with subtle movements, angling slightly left or right, signaling how to navigate the most violent pockets of turbulence. Every time the aircraft shook, every time the wind threatened to shove the plane sideways, the fighter jets adjusted instantly, showing her the safest path through chaos. They weren't just escorting her, they were teaching her how to survive. Lightning split the clouds again, illuminating the scene with electric brilliance. For an instant, she saw all 3 aircraft reflected in the stormy night, her crippled airliner held steady between 2 legendary war machines. The image burned into her mind, surreal and unforgettable. She wondered if her father would have believed this moment. He had told her stories of fighter pilots, of their discipline, their precision, their courage. And now, in the storm that had nearly claimed her and hundreds of passengers, those very pilots were flying by her side. As she guided the plane through another violent jolt, Eagle Lead's voice came through again, firm but supportive. "Stay with us. You're doing exactly what you need to do." The encouragement felt like a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. She lifted her chin slightly, gripping the controls with renewed determination. She could do this, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she wasn't alone anymore. The storm roared around them, thunder shaking the heavens, but the formation held strong. She followed the Raptor's lead, adjusting her altitude and heading in perfect sync with their movements. They carved a path through the darkest part of the storm, their presence turning the impossible into the survivable. And as she flew, for the first time since the disaster began, a new emotion rose in her chest, one she hadn't dared to feel until now. Hope. The world's most advanced fighter jets were escorting her through the storm, not because she was a trained pilot, not because she was special, but because she stood up when no one else could, because she tried when everyone else was terrified. And now the sky itself seemed to be helping her find her way home. The storm unleashed one final, brutal wave, as if nature itself refused to let them go without a final test of her strength. Winds twisted the aircraft with raw, merciless force, tossing the massive jet like a fragile leaf caught in a hurricane. The nose bucked violently, altitude warnings chimed again, and lightning exploded dangerously close to the cockpit windows, each blinding flash illuminating the fear etched into her determined face. Thunder cracked so loudly it rattled the panels beneath her hands, vibrating through the controls, through her bones, through every trembling heart on board. Rain hammered the fuselage so hard it sounded like thousands of fists pounding against metal, demanding entry. Yet even through that chaos, even through the screaming winds and the shaking frame, she held the controls steady with everything she had left. Sweat dripped down her temples, her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but her focus remained unbroken. She scanned the instruments, recalibrating constantly, fighting the storm's violent attempts to tear control away from her. And then, through the swirling clouds, through the darkness, through the electric chaos, she saw it. A faint stretch of concrete appearing like a fading dream, the runway. It wasn't steady. It flickered in and out of sight as clouds swallowed it, then revealed it again like a mirage. But it was there, a lifeline, a promise, a destination she wasn't sure they would ever reach until now. Her breath caught. She steadied her grip. Every lesson her father had taught her rose to the surface. Line up with the center, control your descent, trust your instincts. She aligned the aircraft, wings trembling as crosswinds shoved against the fuselage with impossible force. It felt like the storm was trying to push them away from salvation, trying to drag them back into the sky's merciless grip. But she refused. She fought every gust, every tremor, every flicker of doubt running through her veins. Her father's voice whispered through the chaos like a steady heartbeat. Keep your nose level, correct for drift, trust the landing lights. And she did. She followed every faint memory, every soft echo of his guidance. Outside, the F-22 Raptors that had escorted her through the worst of the storm now soared ahead, pulling away with disciplined grace to give her a clear path to land. Their wings dipped one final time, a silent salute, a gesture of respect from the world's best pilots to a young woman who had just done the impossible. The sight gave her strength she didn't know she had left. Inside the cabin behind her, passengers clutched one another's hands, knuckles white, tears streaming, breaths held hostage by fear and prayers. Some whispered to God, others whispered to loved ones, a few simply closed their eyes, trusting her completely, because trust was all they had left. Flight attendants stood frozen in place, eyes locked on the cockpit door, silently begging the universe for mercy. Every soul on board waited for the outcome they desperately needed, a landing, any landing, as long as it meant survival. Her hands tightened on the controls as she guided the plane through the final descent. The runway cleared beneath the clouds, stretching long and narrow like a pathway carved into hope itself. She adjusted the throttle, easing back with careful precision. The aircraft trembled violently once more as a final crosswind slammed into them, sending the jet tilting dangerously left. Gasps erupted behind her, but she didn't brake. She corrected it instantly, muscle memory activating with flawless instinct. Her father's voice returned, stronger than before, cutting through the storm, the chaos, and even her fear with the clarity of truth. Bring them home. The words settled into her like armor. Her breath steadied, her heartbeat slowed, her vision sharpened until all she could see was the glowing runway guiding her forward. With a final surge of courage, she lowered the aircraft, adjusting pitch and power with a precision she didn't know she possessed. The wheels neared the ground, the aircraft sank lower, 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 every second stretched into eternity. Then, at last impact, wheels screeched, rubber burning against wet concrete as the landing gear fought the violent speed. Metal thundered, reverberating through the cabin, through every trembling passenger, through the storm raging behind them. The plane jolted hard, then steadied her hands, keeping it perfectly aligned, perfectly controlled, perfectly alive. She pressed the brakes gently, carefully, guiding the massive jet down the runway as rain continued to pour in sheets, the storm unleashing its final roar behind them. For a moment, time seemed to stop. No alarms, no screams, no chaos, just the long, endless slide of wheels meeting Earth after a battle in the sky. And then, silence. The aircraft slowed slower until it rolled to a complete, undeniable stop. The lights steadied, the engines hummed softly, the storm quieted outside like a beast finally defeated. She sat there, breath trembling, hands still on the controls, unable to move. She had done it. She had actually done it. A perfect landing, a miracle. Behind her, the cabin erupted into sobs, prayers, laughter, disbelief. Some passengers collapsed into tears, others hugged strangers, some simply stared forward, unable to comprehend the life they had just gotten back. The crew covered their faces with their hands, shaking with relief. Her hands finally dropped from the controls, trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization of what she had accomplished. She had walked into a cockpit as a passenger and walked out as the person who saved hundreds of lives. A passenger had become a pilot, a miracle had unfolded in the middle of the storm, and because of her courage, everyone on that aircraft got to see another sunrise.